John Vest is the Extension Agent for Floyd County with the Virginia Cooperative Extension. His expertise helps novice and experienced farmers produce quality livestock and crops throughout our region. John has offered to share his experiences with our audience and provide them with the knowledge to keep agriculture strong. This is the Ag Show with John Vest.
We'd like to welcome our outside guests that will be tuning in for this episode of the Ag Show, brought to you by Citizens Telephone Cooperative and Virginia Cooperative Extension. I'm John Vest, and this will be our segment on soils.
This episode of the Ag Show and the Seed to Shelf series is brought to you by We Insure Retirement. If you are retired or are planning to retire, visit WeInsureRetirement.com to keep the gold in your golden years.
When it comes to mites, before I jump off that slide entirely, actually let me jump it back for our TV viewers and things. Mites can be smothered. We have products such as neem and horticultural summer oils like Sunspray. Those types of refined natural oil products that can go on plants and smother these type of populations of aphids, of mites, of things of that nature. The problem begins twofold in that, where did I say all this damage is typically occurring? If you look up here, where do you see it in respect to the leaf? Underneath. These little guys, like I said, that one raindrop could be a detrimental whammy on things. They need the protection of their overhead location. That's why the majority of their feeding and their presence is on the underside of the leaves. So in terms of spraying any type of spray, whether it be organic or conventional, if it's a contact spray, it's one that I have to get in contact with the insect. It means I have to be underneath, or I have to create enough leaf stir within the wind of my sprayer or whatever I'm using to actually get that spray underneath the leaves. I have to have that contact situation. I can switch up. I can move away. It's not as easily done on the organic side of things. I can move over, and early season have used possibly a systemic insecticide. Once again, that's allowing an insecticide that's getting into the plant. But then anything that takes that long nose and that soda straw and puts it in there to take a slurp gets done in. I like to save those as either super early season, so they're not present in my plants closer to harvest or according to label. Everything's always in accordance with your label directions. But I don't like to use systemic products largely in the garden unless it's early in the season at that point. In many cases, a systemic product will work its way up into the plant, and it will afford you several weeks to even months, a couple months, 50 some days of insect control. So that anything that takes a bite or feeds on it, potato beetles for instance, we have a systemic product that we can put in furrow, on the furrow, what have you. As that plant grows, absorbs it up, and any potato beetle that hatches out and goes to feed on that plant gets a dose and falls off. And we don't have to deal with them for nearly 50 days. But there towards the end, once we start into hot, dry weather, people don't oftentimes realize that as well. That is also a friend for us when we're combating pests. When we get in temperatures above 90 degrees, usually my diseases and my insects both slow down in their productive damage. So it's a wonderful thing to kind of get into the hot, dry period of the summer. My young plants have been pushing right along. As long as I'm giving them water and stuff at their base and encouraging growth, dry leaf surface and warm temperatures gives rise to beautiful lima beans. But if I'm not careful and choose products wisely at that point, I can create my own problems. I mentioned the sun spray, I mentioned the neem oil, I mentioned some of the oil products that we can use in the garden. Once those temperatures get above, in many cases, 83, 84 degrees, if you'll read the label, it will caution you about its usage. You are putting an oil-based spray on your plant surface, like a blanket, in the sunshine, and it can boil your leaves, in addition to the insects. So, not trying to boil everybody. I'd like you to do your job, but we have to watch about what products can create us problems. So watch about, once we start into mid-June and we're in the heat of July and August, watch about any chemical usage and what can be beneficial or not beneficial to you. Let's jump into the caterpillars, because like I said earlier, if you see skippers, if you see moths, if you see Lepidoptera in general in your garden flying around, flitting around here and there, you've got what? The adult of that particular insect that you know its larval form is a caterpillar of some type. Now, I guess there's a possibility that a caterpillar wouldn't be damaging or terribly damaging, but I don't know of one. Usually as a larval form caterpillar, that insect right there is creating that level of damage, chewing things down, eating things down, just like the cutworms and the like. The understanding that there's lots of products I can use out there as well. I can use the predatory wasps. I can use the insecticidal soaps that I've suggested. I could use spinosad, a wonderful product for caterpillar type larvae interfering with their ability to move up. Bacillus thuringiensis, BT. How many people have heard of BT? Okay. Trade name is Dipel for one, and there's others and stuff. It's a naturally occurring bacteria. It's a naturally occurring bacteria found naturally in the soil that paralyzes the digestive system of caterpillars. Instead of Sevin dust, and not to pick on Sevin, but instead of carbaryl being shaken out like that, like snow in the strawberries or whatever else is going on in the garden, the last carbamate insecticide that I've got in use really today in homeowners' hands, instead of using it, what would happen if I had the ability to spread a dipel or a naturally occurring bacterium that's already out in nature anyway over my plant surface, so that when they did start to get fed on, it paralyzes their ability to mature and develop. And yes, it's a slower effect. I don't necessarily get the benefit bang bang, but I will eventually see no more caterpillars in my garden. Yes?
How many of the adult forms, moth and butterflies, are acting as pollinators for which we might not want to be reducing the population of their caterpillars? Addressing them as a pest in the caterpillar stage versus possible benefits.
Very true. Can they be pollinators? They are pollinators in every case. The potential is there. Are they the pollinators that regularly pollinate garden varietal, material? Not necessarily the case. Usually it's the bees that getting the job done, not just honeybees. Bumblebees, ground bees, mason bees, the various species that have to visit a cucumber blossom at least 7 times just to get the pollinating done. That being said, and that's the case of many of our garden cucurbit varieties and things. We've got a lot of seeds to fertilize. That being said, I can't differentiate that potential damage that would occur there. But what I can do is start thinking to myself, what if I created a farmscape of plant material on one edge of the garden, fennel and other desirable, beneficial plants that would hoard or bring in predatory insects or beneficial insects to live. And I provided, instead of the fall of the year, cutting it all down and burying off that garden area for winter, if I left it up and left them to inhabit it through a mild winter, I'm probably doing more there to benefit not just my beneficial loading, but helping maintain or provide those insects that cheap hotel to stay in and prolong their existence in the area. Yes, it's a battle of. It is a battle of as an adult form, they are usually nectar feeders. They're not necessarily, they're going to be usually more directed toward their plant varieties of choice, but in every case, their young in a garden situation are feeding on leaf or stem surface. So, got to weigh your decisions. The back right there, that by the way, is our predatory wasp. Has laid its eggs in the back of that tomato hornworm, and they've all, as they hatch out and attach themselves, larvae attach themselves, they are going to feed and basically do that big guy in. Maybe not as fast as an organic pyrethrin or pyrethroid would, but at the same time, if I grabbed that organic pyrethrin and sprayed for that worm to knock it down, I just took out all the predators that would also be feeding on the mites, and I can promise you 10 days later, probably a mite flare in the garden. So it's just recognizing how we're going to attack or accomplish things. Here's a wonderful product, like I said, that if I use timely, understanding that I'm going to wait till that 70-degree temperature days. I'm going to wait till these guys aren't really out there and progressing until about June. Maybe I waited till that last week in May and made my application of my BT. And at that point, any of that larval feeding got a dose as the juvenile form and never had a chance to make it to adulthood. Squash bug. Who brought up the squash bug earlier? Squash bugs, for whatever reason, they seem to love our squash and pumpkins. They can leave other cucurbits kind of alone, but as they can do cucumbers or work on any cucurbit family of plants, but they do prefer squash, pumpkin, zucchini, things of that material. Typically, their feeding it'll be small yellow spots on the leaf. It'll darken later and actually turn black where they fed. But and that's just where the leaf is drying out from the pierce that they've made in the stem or in the surface of the leaf. But oftentimes in young squash plants or even mature squash plants, an infestation of this insect, you'll start to see the plant wilt down. Now your head starts thinking, uh-oh, I've got a disease, I've got bacterial wilt, or I've got something else going on here that's contributing to a problem. Well, this particular insect has that much feeding that can suck that much material out of a plant to cause a wilt situation. That's a threshold, and then at that point I want to do something about it. That being said, diatomaceous earth, I will mention, as well as diatomaceous earth works inside, where we can save the crushed diatom. It's an organic product and stuff that in and around baseboards, under cabinets, things like that, certainly work to pierce an insect's exoskeleton, causes it to dry out, the insect dies. No chemicals involved, healthy for me. As soon as I try to use that product outside in the garden, it's a much more difficult situation because the product relies on the shroud, the sharpness and the shrouds of those crushed diatom to really pierce the exoskeleton. If I get them wet, what happens? It kind of clumps it all together. And it's a little more, it doesn't necessarily work as well outside unless I find those types of, or those formulations of diatomaceous earth that have been specifically developed for outside use. That being said, unfortunately, this insect can eat lots of different insecticides or insecticidal chemicals like candy anymore, largely due to their misuse. The Espen Valor right there, the permethrin. What is a permethrin? On the conventional side, you've got permethrin. On the organic side, you've got pyrethrin. What's the difference? One's the organic, or one's the naturally occurring formulation. One is the man-made synthetic formulation. Same chemical. If I use either one incorrectly and I spray and kill out all the predators, or if I use it on my squash bug and kill out the predatory mites and other thing, or whatever else is on that leaf, what can I be aware of in about 10 days, potentially? Creating a flare of other mites or something else behind it. Recognize that just because I'm conventional or just because I'm organic doesn't necessarily change how it reacts with that insect or how it changes a population of insects to result in another pest or problem in the garden. Just understand how you're going to combat that and advance. So once again, I do like the thought process of being able to use something for squash bug that would be organic in nature, pyganic or something like that. But the fact of the matter is, it usually they like or more susceptible to a heavy dose product, or not necessarily a dose product, but a effective conventional spray. So in many cases in the extension office, I'll recommend the permethrin to be used there, and depending on what crop is being grown, make the individual aware of what can come behind that and how they can deal with it. I will say, boom, 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 right there it is again. Carbaryl jumps in there. People fuss about Roundup, yet we go to town with the Carbaryl. Last carbamate insecticide. I don't like its use. This is just a personal opinion. I don't like its use in my garden. It is, that's the end I'm going to say to that. The squash vine borer, different from our squash bug in that this insect, its larval form right here, loves to bore in the base of our squash plants, the base of our zucchini and all the like. They work their way up and down inside the stem, sight unseen, and then we start to get the limp sides of the squash and the wilting and things down. If we do a little excavation or cut things open, we'll see the frass, the yellow material where that borer has been feeding inside. And usually the physical control, the physical removal of the insect early, if we catch it early, can be a suitable means of getting rid of that or preventing that insect. We can also use row covers, the remay and stuff that we talked about early on, because that's an insect that flies in originally and is coming up or progressing in its life cycle from that point and making its way into the stem. And then we can also use the various insecticides that are out there. But once an insect gets inside of a stem or inside of a trunk or a main cavity of a plant, it is so much more difficult to back it out. I used to have the products, the Thiodans, the Thionexes, the various things like that. I will do it with permethrin, or I can suggest it being done with permethrin now. But with the recognition that I'm putting some of the heavy hitter insecticides into my garden to try to combat this insect. Cool thing about a squash stem, I can reach up and this works for some, it doesn't work at all for others. For those that monitor and really kind of pay attention, if you get up there and you take a thin wire and you scramble that little insect in its initial opening and stuff, and pile some soil up and around the stem, higher up on your squash plant, guess what happens? Just like the tomatoes. Everything starts rooting out. I get more root and more system in there. And my plant starts to recover gradually and keeps on going. So I can take advantage of how that squash vine progresses in its root system and its rooting, and hopefully pile some more material up there to encourage its continued growth or rooting and rooting out. It's just a difficult insect. I wish I had a wonderful click my fingers and snap my fingers and have it fixed, but it's one that we can recognize that if I have problems yearly and I've put it down in that notebook and I know that it's happened here, you can, if you will simply replant or plant your seasonal initial transplanting stuff out 3 weeks behind of its initial emergence or its initial progression, it has nothing to feed on when it comes time to find its way to the area. So there are ways that we can combat this culturally, you and I, just changing our planting schedule if we've been sure to write down when we see its progression and understand that in the garden.
Can you go back just a minute about rooting it out?
Yes.
Can you explain that a little further? I didn't really follow you on that.
The squash and the cucurbit has the ability to adventitiously produce more roots up its basal stem. So as if it has damaged an area lower on the stem, and I've taken my chance to either scramble the insect or spray the insect there, I will pile up additional material, more soil, up and around as much as 6 inches, 8 inches, up on the stem of that plant, and allow it to start rooting out into that additional soil. It will do so, and in many cases, if it's not drastically affected, it will.
But that board is still in there.
Not if I've scrambled it or
How do you do that? I guess
that was the thin wire. I'm sorry, I didn't get past the thin wire. Recognizing that it's whole, locating the hole and stuff, and feeding that little wire up there and treating it like a blender of ice cubes. With your.
finding that hole, is that?
It's not that hard.
Really?
For squash vine borer, you can 95% of the time pull material back, and you'll learn to recognize and locate the stem, the stem location where you'll see the feeding track inside, or you'll see the discoloration of the stem. You can go right in there and start scrambling things. If you're good, you catch it.
How long, like that?
It doesn't even, usually a 6 inch, 8 inch, just a straightened paper clip. It's usually a little heavy. Get you a thin one. Play insect destructor on your squash vine borer. Flea beetles. These little guys, if you want to see an example of flea beetle, plant eggplant in your garden, okay? Nothing will provide you a better demonstration of all the insects in the garden than planting eggplant. But in that particular case, flea beetle absolutely loves it, but it also loves your tomatoes and peppers and spinach and things like that. The little tiny holes, it's a beetle. So little rounded, open, chewed in holes through the leaf surface. Ding, 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 beetle. Chewed gnarly edges, chewed off stems, ding, 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 caterpillar, okay? Keeping in mind, I can use naturally occurring BT for caterpillars. I can use X, Y, or Z for the beetle. And my concern about the beetles largely is their ability to travel up and down the row and transmit the viral or the bacterial diseases that go along with them, such as cucumber beetles. I don't care whether you have the striped version or the spotted version, but adult cucumber beetles and their flying and their production. Here in Floyd County, I could take you to our growers and walk you out there as a group at that time of the season and show you exactly how when these insects are present and in a population that needs to be treated, they are contributing to damage within the field. Bacterial wilt is a bacterial disease and a real instance in Floyd County and will actually create a wilt and a dieback that will occur within the field or in the garden. So, once again, planting cucurbits just a few weeks later in the garden than what you normally do will largely find this insect from last year emerging with nothing to feed on, and then hopefully reduce some of its population or its damage by not being present as you grow out and finish your season. The row covers, I use the pyrethroids. I will mention this one little clay product because I'm becoming more and more a fan of this material. Kaolin clay. Has anybody used it? Okay. That Kaolin. Kaolin clay is a fine clay material mixed with water that we spray over the plant. It's not an insecticide. It's not even a fungicide. But it's creating a clay coating over your leaf surface that, one, deters insects from feeding through it, and then two, also can offer a residual layer that it's hard for the fungal organism to grow down into or grow into the leaf from. So one spray, in my opinion, is a good start. 2 sprays are a wonderful thing because I usually have enough clay on my leaf surface that I can still get leaves to photosynthesize well and take in the sunlight and everything. But I've got a residual clay layer that Japanese beetles, ding, 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 y'all's discussion there in the back. If I want to fight a Japanese beetle group, I can mess with their little brains by having a kaolin clay application, 2 applications over my grapevines. Yes?
Isn't that used for apple?
Yes. We use it on lots of different fruit crops, raspberries, blackberries, the like. It's a wonderful, once again, it's not a true chemical insecticide or fungicide or anything. It's just a clay layer. It's a blanket over your leaf surface, over your plant surface that helps to disguise or deter or maybe confuse even that that's the plant the insect needs to fly to create a problem for you. So just something to think about in your garden area. Let's talk real quick about disorders or diseases and how that typically is differentiated in the garden. How do I differentiate the picture he showed me earlier? Is this a disease or is it a disorder or is it something, what's contributing to the problem here? Preferably, I'd love to have a plant when it comes to disease because usually diseases are progressive. They start with a little dose. We start feeling bad. We get worse until something's done. Plants are the same way. So I can see a disease progression over a garden or over a row. I can see its development or its general progression down the row to really be where it's creating a problem. If I've got a disorder or an abiotic or one of those responses, everything kind of matches. It's kind of, everything was subject to the sun scald or that sunny, that wetted leaf that got scalded that day in that particular weather event. So I have to start looking for those things that can differentiate true disease from maybe the disorder. Let's talk about powdery mildew for a moment because every single one of us should be seeing this right now. Powdery mildew is a disease, it's a fungal disease. For most of it's readily controllable. It creates that gray appearance across the surface of your leaves, not just your garden varieties. This is occurring on your dogwoods. This is occurring on your lilacs. Everybody's lilac in bloom right now. So this particular disease, it's also a cool season disease. It's one that you or I are going to expect to see in the garden, usually up until about June. Because at that point, I can still have warm days. I can still have humid days, sticky days, but I can still have cool nights. And that's where this disease proliferates. Then hot, dry June, July, and August comes around, and suddenly, where did my powdery mildew go to? Unless I have maybe some crepe myrtle, might find it carrying over there. But as long as I'm not in the cool nights, that disease is not nearly as progressive as it is in this early, the late spring, early summer. Then in the fall of the year, September clicks in again, heading into October, boom, what am I getting again? Cool nights. I start to pick up the powdery mildew again. And it is truly just that. It's a mildew, that gray-white covering there on the leaf surface. Warm, dry climate. You add that cool night and a humid afternoon, and you end up with its potential to spread across grapevines, garden variety, cucurbits in general, all your cucumbers, squash, things like that. Or air circulation. The more we can do to spread plantings out and encourage the air circulation between things, the better off we are at reducing how long those leaves stay wet and the potential for that disease to spread onto the leaf surface. In fact, of all my garden varieties, if I could just do away with wetting period, or that time that the leaf remains wet into the dark of night, and the temperatures to really allow fungus to grow, the better off I'd be, because if I could keep things dry, it's not going to readily have a chance to spread nearly as well. I can use sulfur. I can use the organic. I can use common old school sulfur products and things of that nature. I can use the neem oil, once again, from an organic perspective. I use conventional product. I use chlorothalonil as my active ingredient. Chlorothalonil is found in Funginyl or Daconil or the nil. The chlorothalonil is an active ingredient on the conventional side that works well on a majority of garden variety vegetables and plants, as well as tree fruit and other fruit plants as well. This is the nasty brother of powdery mildew. And when I say nasty brother, it's because this one is the one that is so evasive and will truly destroy a crop or a planting of whatever you have out there. Downy mildew, once again, it's going to affect all your cucurbits, your brassicas, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, whatever it may be. Downy mildew, though, its earliest signs are really kind of a water-soaked lesion. So if you'll turn the plant over, turn that leaf over, you'll see the water-soaked areas or the dark green areas that look like, they're just damp or they're wet. Now that's the early stages of that particular disease, and as it progresses, it starts to create angular yellow spotting and underneath the fuzzy developmental growth of the disease itself. This is the one that I get aggravated with because it treats itself much like a bacterial disease. When you or I are dealing with things in the garden, 90% of everything we deal with is fungal. And I've got a sulfur or a neem or a chlorothalonil to take care of a fungal disease. I don't have everything to take care of bacterial diseases. Well, here's the difference when you're trying to recognize fungal versus bacterial diseases. Say my leaf is out here like this, and my various venation is continuing up and out to my tips and stuff like that. In most every case, and I shouldn't say every, but a huge percentage of the time, fungal diseases always will start appearing as spots. Now the spots can continue to get so prolific that they start putting themselves together, and you start getting spotting and stuff over the all over the leaf that progress and kind of connect together. But the neat thing about a fungal spot is it always tends to form in concentric rings. This is how we tell when we have early blight or late blight start into the garden, is those fungal diseases, as it opens up, sporulates and settles down, opens up, sporulates and settles down, creates a fungal leaf spot. The bad thing about downy mildew, or the more difficult thing about downy mildew that messes with those of us that try to identify it, if we haven't paid attention to those water-soaked lesions, it, in turn, let's change colors, starts to operate between the veins. So its leaf spots start to become very angular. Now, when you have a bacterial disease, that's how many bacterial organisms are spread, or how they work over a leaf surface. As they're progressing throughout the plant or systemically coming out and growing out on the plant, they are trapped usually between the veins of that plant's leaf. And you'll get that very angular spotting. And you can tell then that you're dealing with a more bacterial condition or bacterial disease as opposed to a fungal disease. There's always exceptions to the rule, and this is one of the ones that creates that exception in that it's kind of trapped by the venation of the leaf and creates yellow spots, just like what we have, kind of like right there. See it trapped inside after it's fully dried out and things. It very, very angular in places. Very fuzzy looking, kind of spread from the top initially, but if you turned it over, you'd see the water-soaked lesions at that point and its progression to start to become a problem. That is this particular disease is more destructive than powdery mildew. I need a stronger fungicide to do the job. I need, in many cases, a conventional suggestion of chlorthalonil or one of those products to really kind of try to hold this one in check. Commercially, we wouldn't even be full. I mean, I'd have my regular conventional products, but I would be getting out my big heavy hitters, the ones that cost $300 or $800 a container to make sure that I don't have 10 acres of squash go down because of this disease. Holy cow, I just got the time. Moving on, late blight. Our tomatoes, early blight, late blight. First thing you need to know is late and early don't mean squat. Okay? In Southwest Virginia, late and early don't mean squat. Those two diseases blow up on wind currents, and the progression starts off in Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, and finally these diseases make their way up on the storm currents and the things that we're experiencing right now, usually in about June, to our area. We've got entire forecast models that we watch commercially just for these diseases because they are so potentially damaging to the crops we're trying to grow Solanaceae-wise. So once again, these are crops that require a stronger fungicide in many cases just to hold the disease in check. It's very hard for me to tackle these from an organic perspective. Now that being said, there are means and different ways to deal with these diseases. And it's how we think of that leaf surface. First of all, if I recognize that I have one of these two fungal diseases, whether it be the late blight or the early blight, timing is everything. If I wait 3 days, I've waited too long, I'm going to lose my crop on late blight. It's going to burn things, it's going to look black and brown and a mess in about 3 days. That being said, if I can catch it early when infection is initially occurring and it hasn't had a chance to grow in or systemically make its way into the plant surface yet, I can use organically the product Oxidate, basically the hydrogen peroxide. I can't suggest off-label products or whatever, but hydrogen peroxide is a wonderful disinfectant for yourself or our plant surfaces. But the things about about hydrogen peroxide are, it's an oxidizer. It's going to kill whatever fungal organism has landed on a leaf surface in the course of that particular day or time up until its use. And if you spray that plant with that type of material as an oxidizer, it's going to destroy it. It's going to, just like it would bubble up on your skin and destroy an infection around a cut or whatever it may be. It's going to destroy those reproductive spores and things on that leaf surface. But it doesn't offer you any residual control. It's only taking care of what's on that leaf surface right then. So then I have to think about what can come second that's going to buy me some residual control of 7 to 10 days before I have to apply something again. There is where I like to suggest the chlorthalonil as my residual fungicide to fight these issues. Right here is copper. Copper is perfectly fine. It's an organic suggestion. It's an organic product that can be found in many organic choices of how it's used. Problem is, copper is a heavy metal I suddenly have just shot myself in the foot for my ability to use an oxidizer like Oxidate or a hydrogen peroxide mixture of some type. Because you oxidize a heavy metal on a plant surface and you get a bubbling, boiling mess, and you'll boil the leaves off your plant. So you cannot have copper on that leaf surface if you chose to use that other means of kind of getting rid of all the disease that's there right then that hasn't grown into the leaf yet. So you've kind of put one hand behind your back and tied it up pretty good and tight. From a conventional perspective, I can use chlorothalonil or I can use other products along with the oxidates and things of that nature to ensure that my crop can continually be grown out over the next several weeks. I have a whole little fact sheet that I put together years ago on a recommendation. It's not necessarily your university recommendation, but how to deal with this particular disease. So if you have that question, jot it down for me, and I'll send it to you. I'll email it to you. Real quick, let's buzz through our biologicals, okay? These are the guys that can get the job done, provided we offer them location and habitat. And whether it be, we always need to be cautious of what gets newly introduced to a particular area. But this is the fact of the matter. Some of these biologicals are more effective at ridding ourselves of the insect populations than what I can spray in some cases. They are hunting actively predators out there on the stem, up and down all day long. Lady beetles are the big ones. Lacewing are the other. How many times have you seen this structure on a plant leaf? And you think, oh, I've got a fungus, I've got something started. It's not fungus. That is the egg of the lacewing, and she's just attached it to the leaf surface so that when it hatches, guess what it looks like? Much like the aphid or the juvenile form of the lady beetle. That's an aphid lion right there. Same thing. Goes to town. So we don't mash this insect. This is a wonderful insect to have in the garden. Moving right along, try to cover this real quick. We have some of the bugs that we don't necessarily like because they can bite the heck out of us. But at the same time, they are wonderful on all soft-bodied insects. So if you have assassin bugs out in the garden, they are going to usually remain in that particular area as long as there's a food source for them. So if you've got aphids or you've got soft-bodied insects feeding on your plants, but you've got assassin bugs in that area, and you're careful to make sure that you don't, mash one or start to push on one and have it bite you, or try to poke a hole in you. The fact of the matter is they can be they're excellent predatory insects in the garden. The minute pirate bug, once again, common on many ag crops. We'll see it out in the alfalfa from time to time. But once again, excellent predatory insect. The cirrid flies, I'm just going to jump right on down through. Your aphid control. Just remember this, aphids are usually being fed on by the ants. The ants are not eating your plants. Okay? Ants are usually feeding on the aphids. That doesn't mean that they can't create a problem of their own, but there it is. There's my ant aphid picture. When ants will actually, I forgot about that part there. They do our defensive mechanisms against other insects because they're all can be there for the other insects too. You have to watch your ants and how they affect the other population of what would normally be doing your predatory feeding. So if you have lacewing, the beautiful insect I said don't match, or if you have any of your destroyers out there, your mealybug destroyers and stuff, those are the ones the ants typically can go after. But usually the ants are not creating a problem on their plant. They're not feeding on the plant itself. They're feeding on the beneficial insects and or the aphids on the plant to some degree too. I don't know how, okay, good. I only had a few more slides. So let me go to two big ones. I get pictures in the office all the time. One is the wheel bug. It also hurts. The other is your European hornets or various bees. Any of your hornets, any of your wasps, keep in mind they're predatory. They feed on other insects. They're not feeding on plant. So while they're certainly dangerous for some of us with allergies or what have you, the fact of the matter is, from a caterpillar perspective or anything like that, they are a natural enemy for those. The wheel bugs, the same way. All right, lastly, so we can send everybody home this evening, and for those of you on television, please remember, if we do nothing more than create a plan and take your notebook over the course of this season, I'm talking right now, starting today, for those of you that have already got stuff out there planted, please, as you walk into the garden every couple days, not for those of us that take 30 days to get back to the garden, we've messed up. But for those of us that visit the garden every day to relieve ourselves of the daily stress, you are now in charge of being your own monitor. Take an opportunity to jot down what you're seeing, when you're seeing it. If we don't know what it is, let's have a conversation about what the pest may be so we can record that information down. Because I promise you, in the past 2 years, the winters that we've experienced and stuff here, they are going to be your problems again for that next upcoming season until we have something that can put the whammy on things and really knock some population. Winter, in many cases, that's kind of a myth, does not really do the job on knocking insects or really even knocking disease. Disease is progressive. It moves into our area. We certainly have the root-related problems, the phytophthors and the verticilliums and the fusarium that I spoke about as far as root diseases. They were there anyway. They were there in the soil to begin with. We're planting those varieties that are hopefully resistant to them. The diseases that are causing us problems are getting blown in. They're getting, they're traveling in by the insects, feeding on one area and moving to the next. With every time the bird lights in one garden and moves to the next, could potentially be a transmission of disease. Recognize when things are appearing in your garden space and jot them down so we can plan or have a plan of action starting in the fall of the year for spring on how we're going to deal with these things. We may decide on what products worked. Did that insecticidal soap I mentioned work? Or do I need to go out here and buy a different product? Was I happy with my neem oil? Or was the majority of my summer too hot to spray it, according to its label, in the garden? Paying attention to those things so that we can make the educated decision on what to do and we'll be more successful. Lastly, before I answer the question, there is, for every pest, every disease, whatever, in the Extension library of things, a publication that will take you or I through life cycle, treatment, what can be done to fix a problem or a pest. By all means, if you have a question or choice, reach out to your Extension agent and we'll email and or get you in snail mail or talk on the telephone and get hopefully your pest problems resolved.